Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World Talks here on TVP World. It's been almost 2 days since Donald Trump announced a very fragile ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. However, violations of this ceasefire via Israel has caused the Iranians to say that the strait will not be open. We haven't seen very many ships leave the strait, leaving very many questions for the global economy, the price of oil, and of course, in relations to Russia, how much the country boosts its war chest. And now joining me to discuss this and more is Hugo Dixon, Commentator-at-Large at Reuters. Hugo, hello. Thank you so much for joining us today on World Talks.
Lovely to be with you, Don, and it is Hugo Dixon, just to get the pronunciation of my last name
Dixon,
correct.
well,
and it's wonderful to be back with you.
Well, I'm sorry for that.
Great.
Thank you so much.
I'm here in New York, and I'm all ears. And this is a very, very important, critical issue, the Strait of Hormuz. So
it is. It is. And of course, we've seen the markets react immediately when this was announced. Of course, it was announced pretty much by the White House without confirmation by the Iranians. And here we are almost 2 days later, and we've seen just a handful of ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So is it open? Is it closed? What's going to happen next, do you think?
Well, it's clearly not fully open. There's just a trickle of ships. The Iranians have said that they want to have their control of the strait acknowledged as part of any peace deal. And they've also said that they want to impose tolls on the ships that go through. And the Revolutionary Guard has said you shouldn't go through the middle of the strait. Even during this ceasefire period, you've got to hug close to the Iranian coastline, which would, of course, give them much greater control of the ships that go through. And the Financial Times had a story that they're demanding that any ships that pass through pay them a fee in cryptocurrencies. So it's very far from open today, and it's very clear that it's going to be fully open even if there is a deal. And Donald Trump, for his part, told ABC, the American television station, that he was considering a joint venture with Iran, under which one assumes that there would be tolls. And he said also on his social media that there was a lot of money to be made. So it looks like we're not going to get a full and free passage of boats through the Strait of Hormuz, even if there's a deal.
Well, now, what are the implications for introducing tolls? This waterway is both national waters and international waters. Charging a toll, wouldn't this upend everything that we know about the freedom of navigation, the laws at sea, and wouldn't this cause knock-on effects in, say, the Strait of Malaga or other choke points in other parts of the world?
Well, it's definitely against international law, and it would definitely be a bad precedent. But we sort of need to deal with realities, and what are we going to do about it? I mean, Donald Trump has created an extraordinary mess, a disaster with his attacks alongside Israel. If he hadn't done this, but the Iranians had decided they wanted to close the Strait of Hormuz, I think you then would have had an international coalition which would have assembled to force their way through. But given the mess that he's created, I don't see that's going to happen. So unfortunately, we may have to deal in realities. And then the question is, what is the least bad thing? And I want to focus now on the European perspective. The European perspective, the most important thing is to get the volumes of oil and gas flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Because while the volumes are low, the prices are high. And that doesn't just hurt our consumers. What it's doing is filling Russia's war chest, and that's helping it fight its war against Ukraine, and that undermines Europe's security. Reuters had a story today, which was that under Reuters, our calculations, the Kremlin is getting from its main oil tax, it doubled the revenue last month in March to $9 billion. And that's just one oil tax. If you look at Russia as a whole, it is pulling in vast sums of money. So the most important thing for Europe, by far, is to get the oil and gas flowing in the same volumes as the past. And if there has to be a toll that's paid to do that, that is not so important. It's not ideal, but when you actually think who's going to pay for the toll, it's going to come out of the Arab countries' extremely fat profit margins. So we won't actually pay. It will be the Arab countries that pay. But the most important thing is to get the volumes flowing. So if I was Friedrich Merz, or I was Donald Tusk, or I was Emmanuel Macron or Keir Starmer, that's what I'd be focusing on.
Getting the volumes, getting the prices down, that'll reduce the revenue for Russia. You know, another great source of sanctions on Russian oil, they're not from Washington or from European capitals, but from the Ukrainian capital, and that's these large drone strikes we've been seeing on Russian export facilities in the Black and the Baltic Sea. Presumably, they have taken about 40% of Russia's ability to export in just the last couple of weeks. But the prices have doubled, as you rightly pointed out. Should Ukraine continue to pound these targets in Russia and do everything possible to make sure that they simply physically can't export oil?
Absolutely. And what we should have is we should have a pincer movement. On the one hand, free up the volumes in the Strait of Hormuz, which will cut the global oil and gas price, and at the same time, the Ukrainians pounding those export facilities and also pounding the refineries and reducing the amount of oil and gas and refined product that Russia can export. And if you have that pincer movement, we'll be back to the good situation that we were in earlier this year, when it really looked like Russia had its back to the wall from an economic perspective, and it was going to face a really difficult financial year. In fact, if you can continue with those strikes and free up the Strait of Hormuz, we could be in an even better situation. So absolutely, a pincer movement is what we need. But my concern is that we are not going to get those free flows of oil through the Strait of Hormuz unless we can move that needle quite a lot. And at the moment, Europe isn't stepping up to the plate, but let's see what they can do. Let's see, and that's what I would be encouraging all of Europe's leaders. We need to make a big priority of that and use whatever leverage we have, whether it is through discussions with Donald Trump, whether it is with discussions with the Iranians, because some European leaders do have still a line into Iran, whether it's discussions with Pakistan, which is, of course, brokering these talks, but also by promising to put together some sort of regime when there is the hot war is over, that would allow some sort of flows of hydrocarbons through the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, at this point in time, when the Europeans aren't necessarily aligned with Donald Trump, they're definitely not coming to his aid militarily to help open those straits. I mean, is it conceivable that Europeans could cut bilateral deals with the Iranian leadership, whatever is left of it, to be able to get some of these ships out and to be able to do so soon? So basically negotiate with the Iranians, but not with the Americans.
I don't think I would do that at this stage. I think that we've got to see how the discussions between America and Iran play out. There are still American sanctions on Iran, not complete because they've waived some of the sanctions on Iran, but the payment of cash to the Revolutionary Guards, for example, would contravene American sanctions on Iran. And so I would be very reluctant to do that as a European country, at least at the moment. I think that we need to see how these discussions progress. We need to encourage them, and we need to try to guide them in the direction that leads to a free flow in terms of volumes, and not worry too much about a price being exacted. If there is a price of, they're talking about $2 million per ship, I mean, that's quite a lot. But, it depends obviously on the size of the ship that goes through and what the cargo is. But obviously we want to get to a situation where there's no tariff at all, no toll. But I'm afraid we may have to put up with that. And the key thing is to try to guide those talks as much as possible, try to make Trump understand that we have an interest there, to try and encourage him with promises that our navies and our air forces could be part of some solution if it's a reasonable solution that we can live with, and use all of the influence that we have with third countries, including through the United Nations, in the coming days and weeks.
Yes, well,
and hours, in fact, because this is very fast moving.
Right. And some reports suggest that the next 2 weeks are absolutely critical for the global economy, inflation, and we all remember before the war in Ukraine just how painful that energy crisis was and how it resulted in inflation. Hugo Dixon, a commentator-at-large from Reuters, thank you so much for joining us on World Talks. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.